The first time Amina realized something was wrong, she was sitting on the edge of her auntie's couch, wearing a dress that clung too tightly to her body. Her auntie had insisted she wear it, saying it would make a good impression on her friend who was coming over. Amina had no reason to distrust her auntie. She was family after all. But when the man arrived, his eyes raked over her like she was an object, not a person. His gaze lingered on her body, and Amina felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Her auntie smiled sweetly, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Amina, be a good girl and entertain him," she said, patting her niece's shoulder. "I'll be in the next room if you need anything." Before Amina could protest, her auntie left, closing the door behind her. The man sat down too close, his breath reeking of alcohol. He reached for her hand, his fingers rough and calloused, and Amina instinctively pulled away. But he only laughed, a low, grating sound that made her skin crawl. "Don't be shy," he said, his voice slurred. His hand moved to her thigh, squeezing it with a possessiveness that made her nauseous. Amina froze, her mind screaming for her to run, but her body wouldn't obey. She glanced toward the door, hoping her auntie would return, but no one came. The man's hands grew bolder, groping her breasts, his fingers digging into her skin as if she were his property. When he pushed her down onto the couch, she clenched her eyes shut, tears streaming down her face as he violated her. She felt every thrust, every grunt, every moment of his weight crushing her. When it was over, he tossed a few bills onto the table and left without a word. Amina stumbled to the bathroom, her legs trembling. She turned on the faucet and scrubbed her skin until it was raw, but she couldn't wash away the feeling of his hands on her, the smell of his sweat, the sound of his voice. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes hollow and lifeless. The girl staring back at her was a stranger. The nights that followed were a blur of pain and humiliation. Men came and went, each one worse than the last. Some were rough, grabbing her by the wrists or hair, forcing her into positions that left her bruised and aching. Others were quieter, their touches lingering and deliberate, as if they enjoyed her fear. One man, older than her father, had whispered cruel things in her ear as he took her, his breath hot and sour. "You're nothing," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Just a thing to be used." Amina's auntie watched it all with a cold detachment. She would stand in the corner of the room, her arms crossed, as if this were a normal transaction. After each man left, she would count the money, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. "This is for your future," she would say, handing Amina a small portion of the earnings. But Amina knew the truth. There was no future for her, only this endless cycle of pain and degradation. One night, after a particularly brutal encounter, Amina lay on the cold floor of her auntie's apartment, her body trembling and her spirit shattered. The man had been drunk, his hands rough and his words cruel. He had slapped her when she tried to resist, leaving a red mark on her cheek. When he was done, he had tossed a few crumpled bills onto the floor and left without a backward glance. Amina curled into a ball, her arms wrapped around herself as if she could somehow hold the pieces of her broken soul together. She thought of her parents, of the life she had left behind. They had trusted her auntie to take care of her, to give her a better life. But this was no life. It was a living nightmare. She thought of the village, of the fields where she used to play, of the sound of her mother's laughter. She thought of the dreams she had once cherished, of going to school, of becoming a teacher, of making her parents proud. Those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else now, someone who no longer existed. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I'm sorry." She didn't know who she was apologizing to, her parents, herself, or the girl she used to be. But the words felt heavy, final. The next morning, her auntie found her lifeless body. Amina had taken her own life, unable to bear the weight of her suffering. Her auntie, ever pragmatic, buried her in an unmarked grave on the outskirts of the city. She told everyone Amina had run away, her voice steady and her eyes dry. Back in the village, Amina's parents waited for news, their hearts growing heavier with each passing day. They never learned the truth about their daughter's fate, but they felt her absence like a wound that would never heal. The promise of a better life had been a lie, and their beloved Amina was gone forever. If you like to see more heartfelt stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you and see you in the next video.